No one at the poker table believed him when the dealer pushed the final pot his way. The room went quiet, not because of the money, but because of what he'd just won. Not cash. Not chips. A ranch. An entire stretch of forgotten land in the high desert, scribbled on a yellow deed and tossed into the game as a joke. The men laughed. Someone clapped him on the back and said, "Congratulations, you just bought yourself nothing." He laughed too, because at that moment, it felt lucky. It felt unreal. And it felt harmless. But luck has a way of disguising itself. The ranch sat 3 hours from the nearest town, tucked beyond cracked highways and wind-scarred hills where cell signals died and silence stretched too wide. The kind of land people abandoned, then pretended never existed. When he first arrived, dust rolled across the yard like fog, and the old gate creaked as if it hadn't been touched in years. The house leaned slightly, exhausted by time. The corral was empty. No cattle. No horses. Just hoofprints pressed deep into dry earth, fresh ones. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. He told himself it was wild horses passing through. Mustangs still roamed these parts, people said. Free, untamed, and dangerous. Still, something about the prints bothered him. They circled the corral, slow and deliberate, like something had been waiting, watching. That first night, the wind didn't sound like wind. It sounded like breathing. He barely slept, jolting awake to noises he couldn't place, wood shifting, metal tapping, the low distant sound of a horse nickering, then stopping abruptly as if cut short. By dawn, he convinced himself it was imagination. Just regret. You don't win a ranch in poker without consequences, he thought. So he stayed. Because walking away felt like admitting he'd been wrong his whole life. You see, this wasn't just about land. He was running from something, years of drifting, jobs that never lasted, promises he'd broken to people who once believed in him. Poker had been the only thing he was ever good at. Reading faces. Betting on instincts. And for once, instinct told him this ranch mattered. Like it was a test. That's when he saw the horse. It stood at the far edge of the property as the sun burned through the morning haze. Still as stone. Its mane lifted slightly in the breeze, but its body didn't move. It didn't graze. It didn't blink. It just stared at him. He froze. Wild horses usually run. They scatter at the scent of humans. This one didn't. Its eyes were dark, reflective, and unsettlingly aware. For a moment, just a moment, he had the irrational thought that the horse recognized him. Like it had been waiting. When he took a step forward, the stallion stepped too. Matching him. Perfectly. His heart pounded. The air felt heavier, charged. He spoke without thinking, his voice rough and uncertain. "Hey, easy." The words felt foolish the moment they left his mouth. The horse flicked an ear, but didn't retreat. Then, without warning, it turned and walked toward the ruins of the old stable, one that didn't show up on any map. The boards were half collapsed, the roof caved in. No reason for any animal to go there. Yet the stallion disappeared inside like it belonged. When he reached the stable, the horse was gone. Vanished. No hoofbeats. No movement. Just silence and dust motes drifting in the light. His skin prickled. He circled the building, heart racing, but there was no exit on the far side. No tracks leading away. It was as if the horse had dissolved into the air. That's when he noticed the markings on the wall. Carved deep into the wood. A symbol of a horse, rearing, surrounded by dates, some scratched out, some circled. Names etched beside them. Most unreadable. One still clear. Elias Grant. The name matched the deed. A chill ran through him. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in odds, in logic, in the cold math of chance. But standing there, with the desert silent around him and that name staring back, something inside him cracked. That afternoon, he drove into town and asked questions he didn't really want answers to. Most people pretended not to hear. Others warned him quietly. The ranch had a reputation. Horses that wouldn't stay. Owners who left suddenly. Fires that started without cause. And always, always, the stallion. They called it the ghost stallion. Not because it was dead, but because no one ever truly owned it. One woman, older than the rest, finally met his eyes and said, That horse don't haunt the land. It guards it. And it don't trust easy. That night, as the sun sank red behind the hills, he stood outside the house, watching the shadows stretch. Part of him wanted to leave. To drive until the road reconnected him to the world. But another part, stronger, stubborn, stayed rooted. Then he heard it. It was slow, intentional, coming closer. Out of the dark, the stallion emerged again, closer this time. Close enough that he could see the scars along its flank. Old rope burns. Healed lash marks. This horse had known humans before. And it hadn't forgotten. The stallion stopped 10 feet away. They stared at each other, man and horse, both wounded in ways that didn't show easily. The wind stilled. The moment stretched. And for the first time since winning the ranch, he realized something terrifying. The poker game hadn't been the gamble. By the third morning, the stallion had become a constant presence, always there, never close enough to touch, like a shadow that refused to leave. Sometimes he'd appear at the edge of the corral at dawn. Other times he'd stand on the ridge at sunset, silhouetted against the burning sky. He never made a sound. Never grazed. Just watched. And the watching did something to a man. It stripped away excuses. He stopped telling himself the horse was a coincidence. Stopped pretending the ranch was just bad luck. Something here was unfinished. Something tied the land, the stallion, and the names carved into that stable wall. And whether he liked it or not, he was now part of it. So he decided to approach the horse. Not because he felt brave, but because running had been his whole life, and it had never saved him. He spent the morning preparing like he was about to walk into a storm. He remembered what little he knew about horses. No sudden movements, no staring into the eyes, always give them space. He filled an old bucket with water, grabbed a handful of grain he'd bought in town, and stepped out into the open land with his heart hammering. The stallion was already there. Standing near the dry creek bed, muscles taut, head high. Up close, the horse looked even larger than he'd imagined. Power rolled off him in quiet waves. This wasn't just a wild horse. This was a stallion that had survived things meant to break him. The man stopped a good 20 yards away. "Easy," he said again, softer this time. "I'm not here to hurt you." The stallion's ears flicked back. A warning. He took another step. The horse didn't retreat. Instead, it pawed the ground once, sharp, deliberate. Dust lifted like smoke. That should have been the moment he backed away. But something inside him pushed forward. The same instinct that had made him call a risky bet on a bad hand. The same stubborn belief that if he just stayed long enough, things would change. He reached out his hand. The reaction was instant. The stallion exploded into motion, rearing high, hooves slicing the air, a scream tearing from its chest that sounded less like a horse and more like rage-given voice. The man stumbled back, heart slamming, barely keeping his footing as the horse came down inches from him. Then the stallion charged. Not to trample, but to test. It rushed past him so close he felt the wind of its body, then skidded to a stop and wheeled around, eyes blazing. Dust swirled between them. The message was clear. "You don't get to touch me." The man fell back onto the ground, breath ragged, palms burning. For a long moment, he thought that was it, that this was how people disappeared from the ranch. Trampled, dragged, fizz. But the stallion didn't attack again. Instead, it stood there, trembling. Not with anger, with fear. That was the moment everything shifted. He saw it then. Not a monster. Not a ghost. A survivor. A creature that had learned the hard way that humans brought pain, not safety. Rope burns didn't come from the desert. Lash marks weren't made by wind. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. "Whatever they did to you, I'm not them." The stallion snorted, tossing its head, but didn't leave. Its chest heaved. Its eyes never left his face. Slowly, carefully, the man pushed himself up, not toward the horse, but sideways, creating space. He set the grain on the ground between them, then backed away another step. He sat down. Made himself smaller. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The sun climbed higher. Heat pressed down. Flies buzzed. His legs cramped, his back ached, but he didn't move. For once, he didn't try to force an outcome. Finally, The stallion took a single step forward. Then another. Every nerve in the man's body screamed not to breathe. The horse lowered its head, sniffing the air, muscles still coiled tight enough to bolt at the slightest wrong move. It reached the grain, nosed it suspiciously, then ignored it completely. Instead, it looked at him again. Longer this time. Closer. Something unreadable passed through its eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. Then the stallion turned away. Just like that, it walked back toward the ridge and disappeared over the crest, leaving the grain untouched and the man shaking in the dust. That night, he sat alone in the house, replaying the moment over and over. He realized how close he'd come to disaster, not just physically, but emotionally. He'd treated the stallion like a problem to solve. A challenge to win. That was his old pattern. Poker had taught him to push. To press advantages. To dominate the table. But horses didn't work that way. Neither did healing. Neither did life. Later, as the moon rose, he heard hooves again. This time, they stopped outside the house. He didn't open the door. He just sat there, listening. For a while, the stallion paced. Slow steps. Then stillness. When he finally looked out the window, the horse was standing in the yard, staring at the house like it was memorizing it. Guarding it. The next day, help arrived in the form of a woman named Clara. She'd worked with horses her entire life. Rescues, mustangs, animals too broken for anyone else to bother with. She'd heard he'd taken the ranch and guessed why he was still alive. You don't approach a horse like that to own it, she told him, scanning the land. You approach it to understand it. She noticed the stable immediately. The carvings. The names. This stallion belonged to Elias, she said quietly. And Elias didn't deserve him. The man swallowed. Can he be saved? Clara looked toward the ridge, where a familiar shape stood against the sky. He doesn't need saving, she said. He needs someone who won't quit on him. As if on cue, the stallion let out a low, distant call. Not angry. Not afraid. Waiting. If you're feeling this story, don't forget to share it, because what happens between this man and this horse next is something no one in town believed possible. Clara didn't like talking about the past. Not because she didn't know it, but because she'd seen what happened when people learn too much too late. Still, as she stood inside the collapsed stable, fingers tracing the carved names, she knew this story couldn't stay buried. Elias Grant was a good horseman once, she said quietly. Or at least he started that way. Dust drifted through the broken roof as the man listened, heart thudding. Outside, the desert lay unnaturally still, as if the land itself were listening. Then the drought came, Clara continued. Cattle died. Money dried up. And Elias changed. Her voice tightened. People don't always break loudly. Sometimes they rot from the inside. The stallion had been young then. Powerful. Rare. A bloodline people would have paid fortunes for. Elias tried to sell him. Tried to break him hard and fast to raise the price. When the horse resisted, Elias pushed harder. Oops. Isolation. Hunger. The man clenched his jaw. The stallion escaped one night, Clara said. Tore through the corral like it was paper. Elias went after him in a storm. Neither of them were seen again. What about the body? The man asked. Clara shook her head. They found Elias 2 days later. Thrown from his horse. Neck broken. She hesitated. But the stallion was standing over him when they found the body. Wouldn't let anyone close. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush bone. So they blamed the horse, the man said slowly. They tried to kill him, Clara replied. Failed. After that, people left the ranch alone. And the stallion stayed. A gust of wind swept through the stable, rattling loose boards. For a moment, the man could almost see it. The younger horse, panicked and furious, the storm tearing across the land, the final struggle between cruelty and survival. No wonder he doesn't trust humans, he muttered. Clara looked at him sharply. Trust isn't given. It's earned. And sometimes it costs more than people are willing to pay. That afternoon, they spotted the stallion again, closer than before. Standing near the water trough Clara had repaired that morning. He didn't drink, just watched them work. He's curious, Clara whispered. That's good. Curiosity means hope. They didn't approach him. Instead, they worked. Fixed fences. Cleared debris. Rebuilt the trough. Small things. Quiet things. The kind of effort that didn't demand anything in return. Hours passed. Then, without warning, the stallion stepped forward. One step, then another. The man's breath caught. He didn't move. Didn't speak. He felt like a child again, scared, hopeful, unsure which emotion would win. The horse lowered its head, sniffing the air near the trough. Its sides bore the scars Clara had mentioned, faded but unmistakable. History written into flesh. Slowly, carefully, the stallion drank. The sound was soft, rhythmic, ordinary, and somehow, it felt like a miracle. That's the closest he's been in years, Clara murmured. The man felt something tighten in his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future here. Not gambling. Not running. Building something real. Something that stayed. Then the sky darkened. Clouds rolled in faster than forecasted, heavy and bruised. Thunder grumbled low, distant but growing. The stallion stiffened instantly, head snapping up. Fear flashed across his face like lightning. Storms remembered him. Before Clara could react, the stallion bolted. He ran straight toward the old stable. No, she breathed. Not there. The man didn't think. He ran after him. Rain hit hard, turning dust to mud in seconds. Wind howled. Thunder cracked so close it rattled teeth. By the time he reached the stable, the stallion was trapped inside, rearing, screaming, panic consuming him. The roof groaned under the sudden weight of rain. Get out! Clara shouted from behind, but the man was already inside. He kept his distance, heart pounding, shouting over the storm. Easy. I'm here. You're not alone. The stallion slammed into a support beam. Wood splintered. Another crack of thunder. The roof shifted. If the stable collapsed, the horse would be crushed. The man remembered Elias's story. The storm. The chase. The death. History was repeating itself. Except this time, someone stayed. He moved slowly, hands open, placing himself between the stallion and the collapsing wall. Every instinct screamed danger. One kick would end him. But the horse hesitated. Their eyes met. For the first time, there was no fire in the stallion's gaze. Only terror. It's okay, the man said, voice breaking. I won't leave you. I swear. The words surprised him. He'd never sworn anything and meant it like this. The stallion trembled. Another beam snapped. Then, unthinkably, the horse stepped toward him. Not in trust. In surrender. Clara shouted for them to move as the man guided the stallion, inch by inch, toward the door. Rain soaked them both. The horse pressed close, breathing hard, accepting help it had refused for years. They burst out just as the roof collapsed behind them with a deafening crash. Thunder. And two living beings standing in the open, alive. The stallion stood beside him, chest heaving, body touching his shoulder. For a brief, sacred moment, the horse didn't pull away. Clara stared in disbelief. He chose you, she whispered. The man rested his forehead against the horse's neck, tears mixing with rain. He felt the stallion's heartbeat, wild, powerful, real. Not a ghost. A guardian. After the storm, nothing on the ranch felt the same. The stable lay in ruins, broken beams scattered like bones across the mud. The air smelled of wet wood and ozone, but beneath it all was something else. Relief. Survival. The kind that settles deep in the chest and refuses to leave. The stallion stayed. Not at a distance. Not on the ridge. He stayed near the house. Clara noticed it first the next morning, her eyes widening as she scanned the yard. He's still here, she said softly. He's never done that before. The stallion stood beneath the old cottonwood, head low, watching the house with quiet intensity. When the man stepped outside, the horse didn't flee. Instead, he shifted his weight, uncertain, but present. That was the difference. Presence meant choice. Over the next few days, they settled into a fragile rhythm. The man worked the land. Clara helped rebuild what mattered, temporary fencing, a safer shelter far from the old stable. The stallion watched it all, every nail hammered, every board lifted, every bucket filled. Sometimes he stepped closer. Sometimes he backed away. Trust came in inches, not leaps. The man learned to read the stallion's body language the way he once read poker tells. The flick of an ear, the tension in a shoulder, the pause before retreat. Only this time, there was no winning hand. Just patience. At night he looked. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the quiet. About the life he'd wasted chasing luck. About the nights he'd lost everything and told himself he deserved it. About the fear that if he stayed too long in one place, he'd fail again. The stallion listened. Or maybe he just stood there. Either way, it mattered. Then the trucks arrived. 2 of them. County markings. Dust plumes trailing behind like bad news. Clara stiffened the moment she saw them. Animal control, she muttered. And they didn't come to help. Word had spread. Someone had reported a dangerous wild stallion on private land. A liability. The threat. The officers were polite but firm. That horse has a history, one of them said. Injuries. Aggression. We've been looking for him for years. The stallion stood behind the man now, close enough that he could feel the warmth of his breath. They'll take him, Clara whispered. Or worse. The man's chest tightened. All his life, when pressure came, he folded. Walked away. Let things be taken from him. It was easier than fighting a system that didn't care. But this wasn't a card game. This was a living being who had chosen him. He's not dangerous, the man said, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. He's been abused. He's scared. But he's not a threat. The officer glanced at the scars. That horse has killed a man. No, Clara snapped. Cruelty did. The officers exchanged looks. We'll need proof of control, one said. Otherwise, we remove him. Control. The word hit hard. The stallion sensed the tension immediately. His muscles tightened. Old fear stirred. The man turned slowly toward him, heart pounding. This was it. The moment where trust either held or shattered forever. He stepped forward. 1 step. The stallion didn't move. 2 steps. The horse's ears flicked, uncertain. The man raised his hand, not to grab, not to claim, but to offer. He remembered the storm. The moment of surrender. The shared heartbeat. It's okay, he said quietly. I won't force you. Time stretched. The officers watched. Clara held her breath. The stallion lowered his head. Then, with a hesitation that felt like eternity, he stepped forward and pressed his forehead gently against the man's chest. Gasps broke the silence. The contact was brief, but undeniable. He chose, Clara whispered. The officers stood stunned. One of them cleared his throat. We'll file this as a managed rescue case. Temporary permit. But if anything goes wrong... I know, the man said. I'll take responsibility. That night, he sat alone on the porch, the weight of the decision settling in. Responsibility. He'd avoided that word his entire life. Now it felt heavy, and right. The stallion lay down nearby. Not far. Close. The next test came sooner than expected. A neighboring rancher arrived, furious. Accusations flew. The stallion had spooked his cattle. He demanded compensation. Threatened legal action. The man listened. Didn't argue. Didn't bluff. Instead, he offered something unheard of. I'll give up half the land, he said. Fence it properly. Keep him contained. Clara stared at him. That's your ranch. He nodded. Land can be replaced. Trust can't. The rancher hesitated. Then softened. He'd heard the stories too. Maybe seen the stallion in storms. Maybe recognized pain when he saw it. Fine, the rancher muttered. But that horse better be worth it. The man watched the stallion lift his head, ears forward, alert but calm. Worth it. For the first time, he didn't think about what he'd lost. He thought about what he was becoming. The desert changed quietly. Not all at once. Not in a way you could point to and say this is the moment everything turned. But little by little, the land softened. Grass pushed through cracks where nothing had grown before. Birds returned to the cottonwood. The wind no longer felt empty. And the ghost stallion, he stopped being a ghost. They never named him. Names felt like ownership, and ownership had nearly destroyed him once. Instead, they spoke to him in presence. In patience. In consistency. The man learned that trust wasn't built in breakthroughs, it was built in mornings. Every sunrise he walked the fence line. The stallion followed at a distance at first. Then closer. Eventually shoulder to shoulder. No rope. No saddle. Just two beings moving through the same rhythm. The first time the man touched him, really touched him, it wasn't dramatic. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. The stallion stood still as the man brushed dust from his neck with an open palm. The horse flinched for half a second, then relaxed. Exhaled. Leaned into the contact like he'd been waiting years for it. The man cried without realizing it. Not because of the horse. Because for the first time in his adult life, he felt trusted. Clara watched from a distance, smiling through tears. That horse didn't forgive humans, she said later. He forgave himself. The ranch became known for something else after that. Not curses. Not disappearances. Healing. Word spread quietly at first, about a wild stallion that no longer ran, about a man who didn't break horses but listened to them. Rescues arrived. Horses no one else wanted. Animals labeled dangerous, untrainable, lost causes. The ghost stallion watched them all. He never interfered. Never dominated. But he stood nearby during every first approach, every trembling step. Grounded. Present. Like a sentinel. Horses that panicked around humans settled faster when he was there. Traumatized animals mirrored his stillness. It was as if he carried a message only they could hear. You are safe. You are seen. The man realized then what the townsfolk had misunderstood all along. The stallion hadn't been haunting the land. He'd been protecting it. One evening, a boy from town arrived with his father. The child had been injured in an accident. Fearful, withdrawn, refusing to speak. The father didn't ask for miracles. Just a moment of peace. The man led them to the pasture and waited. The ghost stallion approached the fence on his own. The boy reached out, hesitant. The stallion lowered his head and breathed softly against the child's hand. The boy smiled. It was small, fragile, but it was everything. That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert gold, the man sat on the porch, watching the stallion stand against the horizon, strong, whole, no longer alone. He thought about the poker game. The laughter. The joke of a worthless ranch. He understood now. Luck hadn't brought him here. Pa said, every bad decision. Every night he ran. Every moment he chose the easy way out. All of it had led him to this place, to this horse, to a chance he hadn't known how to ask for. The ranch wasn't a prize. It was a responsibility. Years later, people would still argue about the legend. Some swore they saw the stallion during storms, standing watch. Others claimed the land itself felt different, calmer, safer. The man didn't correct them. He didn't need to. Because every morning when he stepped outside, the stallion was there. Not as a ghost. Not as a warning. But as proof. Proof that broken things don't need to be erased. Proof that trust can be rebuilt. Proof that sometimes, the greatest wins come from hands we never meant to play. As the camera pulls back on the ranch, horse and man silhouetted against the endless desert, the voice fades into one final thought. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes second chances matter. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe, because stories like this remind us why the bond between humans and horses is truly unforgettable. Because the ghost stallion was never meant to disappear. He was meant to be found.